What's up, guys? It's Wade from Was Gaming, and I'm coming back at you with another Warhammer 40k Tacticus video. And in today's video, I have a treat for you. I'm going to make my first ever tier list. And what we're going to make a tier list on is Arena, guys. So, not to be confused with Live Arena, or not ranking characters on any other part of the game besides Arena. This is just for Arena. And with that, guys, I know some of my popular videos have been my arena report videos, and if you've been paying attention to my channel, you've noticed that for the last 2 weeks I haven't done one of those. And the reason is because the top 10 units really hasn't changed the last couple weeks. Maybe one or two uses here or there, but not enough for me to really want to make a video, and you guys would basically just be watching the same as the last video that I posted, my last arena report that I posted. So if you're curious what the meta is, go check that video out because it basically hasn't changed. And that's why I decided, you know what, instead of doing these arena reports right now, I'm going to go ahead and make a tier list. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop making arena reports. I'm just going to pick and choose when I make them going forward. It's not going to be an every week thing. Basically, if I see the meta has shifted, I'll make an arena report, and we'll talk about that. And we did just have a new character introduced into the game, so maybe in a week or two, the meta does shift a little bit, and I will make an arena report when that happens. But with that, without making videos, I still wanted to make arena content, and so today I decided to go ahead and make a tier list. Now, as always with these type of things, guys, this is my opinion. Okay, so I'm sure there'll be some disagreement. I do feel like I have a pretty educated opinion on this just because I have been closely paying attention to arena meta. But if you disagree, go ahead and let me know in the comments section why I overrated or underrated a character. So with that being said, we're going to jump into this. I'm not going to deep dive into every character. I'm just going to go ahead and give you, a quick little synopsis of the character and why I think they're in what tier I put them in. So with that, let's look at the tiers first. So I've got Gods of the Arena. These are the characters that have been dominating Arena basically since the game released. If you guys have been paying attention to Arena, you probably already know what characters are going to go in here. The A characters are going to be characters that are high use characters, characters that were consistently, in those top 10 lists that I was making in my arena reports, and we saw them consistently and consistently had decent amount of usage. B tier characters are going to be characters that maybe more sparse use on these characters that were being used in arena, but just now and again, not the big characters. C is going to be characters that we pretty much almost never see in arena. Not saying they're not good characters, they're just characters that aren't really being built for arena. D are going to be characters that maybe are slightly useful but really don't belong in arena, and then just don't is exactly that. Characters that don't even bother building for arena because they're not going to be used in arena. So with that being said, I'm going to start with orcs just because I'm looking over my phone and that's what we got first. And the first character we're going to start out with is Snotflaga. So Snotflaga, I'm just going to go right ahead and put him into C tier. He doesn't really see a lot of use in arena. There is occasionally, as I was coming up the arena leagues, there were some guys that were just using like all orc builds. But outside of that, you don't really see him. He is an okay character. I put him in C tier just because he is a summoner. And maybe it's just people aren't building him, and maybe he has some upward mobility on this list if people start building him. But as of right now, I see him kind of like an average arena character. Nobody's really using him in the top tier stuff. You can get away with using him maybe in lower tier arena, but as you get higher, Alright, next character we got is going to be Gib a Scrapper. Okay, I'm going to put him probably in the C tier as well. And the main reason I'm going to put him in C tier is, again, he doesn't see a lot of high usage, high arena usage. But he actually does have a summon, and he just summons the tank, and the tank is actually pretty decent. But the main reason I see him as being C tier is because of his passive that gives all friendly adjacent units armor. Extra armor. If it wasn't for that passive, he'd probably be a D tier model. or unit or character, whatever you want to say. But with that passive, I think that probably bumps him into the C category. You can get away with using him early game. You're just not going to really use him later on. Coming in next, we have Snapareka. There we go, said it right. All right, so again, I'm going to be putting him in the C tier. And you guys are probably already rolling your eyes. Oh my gosh, we got so many guys in the C tier. Guys, C and D is going to be filled with characters. There's a lot of characters here that just don't get used, but on paper look decent. And they'll probably end up somewhere in the C or D tier. And that's kind of the case with Snapareka. He does have a range 3 attack, which is nice. He does have armor piercing. Or sorry, his passive lowers armor. It ignores armor and then lowers armor. But he is kind of squishy. So again, outside of those all orc teams, you don't really see him. He can put out some damage. And, you know, again, I think this might just be a case of people aren't really using him. His active's not super great. It does pierce or physical damage, and then he takes a bunch of damage. So not super great. He's probably closer to the D tier. He's somewhere in this D to C. I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt and put him in C tier. All right, coming in next. This is going to be my first interesting take. It's Tank Smasher. Now, Tank Smasher, I don't see often. He is occasionally used in some of the upper tier, and I'm not 100% sure why. He has decent mobility, but his active, where he charges forward, doesn't do a lot of damage and basically just moves guys around. And then he does have, when he takes damage in melee, he does hit them back the first time. But I'm gonna put him in C tier. You know, I'm sure some of the higher ups are like, oh my goodness, he's A or B. I just don't see it with this guy. He doesn't do the damage. Now, on a live arena, it's different. Live arena, you could cap all 3 points with his one active, and he's better in a live arena. But in regular arena, I just don't see it with him. So I'm going to put him in C tier. Usually, I'm not going to really rank these, but he probably is at the high end of C tier. But for most part, guys, I'm not going to move and rank them in the tier. I just, you know, I'm sure some people right now are like, oh my gosh, this guy's B tier. And guys, if you're one of those guys, let me know in the comment section why you use them. So after one controversial take, we're going to move right into another one, and that's Boss Golgorts. I'm going to put him in B tier. You do see him in Arena, and as I've said countless times in my Arena videos, my Arena review videos, I don't understand why. He has multi-hits, his WOG is good, but in regular Arena, extra movement rarely matters. Just because of how you can set up and basically let your opponent come into you, the extra movement rarely comes up. And yeah, he puts out a decent amount of damage, but none of his damage is like piercing or anything. It's actually all low pierce rate. So into higher armor stuff, he's just not going to do any damage. And yes, his multi-hits are good against scarabs. You know, for me, I just don't see it with this guy. I've said it a lot in all my videos. I've asked people to leave comments and tell me why I'm wrong. I haven't really got a good convincing argument of why I'm wrong on this guy. He does get used, so I am going to put him on B tier, but I don't think he's up here with the other really good models in Arena, characters, models. You know what I mean. All right, so moving on, we are going to move on to the ultramarines. Now, the ultramarines are going to be interesting because they're the units that you kind of start the game with. And some of them are decent, but they tend to fall off. A lot of them are going to end up in this one tier, and it's because they fall off. So first off, we're going to go with Varo Tagaris, and he is actually going to make it into B tier. The reason why I put him into B tier is occasionally he is being used by some of the better players, and I think mostly it's because his active is a nice, decent AoE. He is a Psyker, so his psychic damage has high pierce, which is really good against armor. And then his active that helps guys around him block is pretty nice. So I think you see Varo used a little bit, and it is because of, his skills, and that's going to be enough to put him up in the B tier. He's definitely not an A tier character, but you can build him, and early on, you're going to build him early on in Arena, and he kind of holds his own more than the other ultramarine characters do. So moving on, we have Certus. Certus is, I'm going to put him in C tier. He is decent, but again, he's another one of these characters that, like, early game, really, really good, but as you get higher in Arena, he falls off. You don't see Certus in top Arena. Again, guys, we're not talking about live Arena here, but you just don't see him at the top, in the top 2 leagues. He just doesn't get used. I think he just kind of falls off, and I think he's also one of those characters that, let's be honest, got replaced by a better character. We'll get to that character later. You probably already know who I'm talking about, but there's a character that kind of fills his role. If that character didn't exist in the game, he'd probably be B tier, because I still think people would be using him. But since the other character is in the game, I don't know why I'm trying to keep C, because of Calendus, right? Calendus is in the game, has basically stole his spot, and I think that kind of moves him into C tier. Again, a character early on in the game that you're going to use, and if you missed out on Calendus, maybe he's more of a B tier character for you. But if you do have Calendus, he's going to be a C tier character. Again, guys, not talking live arena. He's very good in live arena. Next up, we have Bellator. And guys, you'll never guess where he's going to end up. That's right, he's going to end up in C tier. There's going to be a lot of guys in this C tier. He's another guy early in Arena, lower leagues. He's going to be really useful. He is really tanky. The problem is, at the higher you get into Arena, the less damage he does. He just doesn't do enough damage. Yes, he's tanky, but he just doesn't do enough damage. And unfortunately, Arena's very brutal. A lot of things get one shot in Arena, even at the high end of stuff, or at least get put, hit once and get put in the spot where they are in one shot range after that. And he just does not do the damage. Yes, he can make extra bodies if he lives long enough, but a lot of times Arena battles are over by round 2. So if you're not using his ability first turn, you're probably not going to get a good opportunity to use it in the second turn. And he just doesn't do the damage to justify being higher than C tier. Again, early on, yes, you can use him, but once you kind of get up into the mid-tier Arena, he's going to start falling off, and then by the time you get in the top Arena, you just don't see him. All right, coming in next is our first just don't, and that is Incisus, or Inkink. I don't know how to say this, guys, I'll be honest. It looks like Incisus. I'm going with that. I can't even try to pronounce it the other way. Healers in this game have a very weird role. They're really only useful in, really in Onslaught. It's the only time I see real uses, other than, hey, I have this quest where I have to heal. And honestly, Incisus is the worst of the healers in the game. Just don't. And this just doesn't apply for Arena, guys. This is for most of the game. Just don't with Incisus. But yeah, moving on. So we're going to get to our first legendary. And our first legendary is going to be Calgar. Calgar is an interesting character. He did just recently get a buff. And I think that buff maybe moves him out of C tier into B tier. I honestly think he's either high C or low B. I am loading up characters in C tier right now, so I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt and put him up in B tier here. He is tanky. He's tanky as all get out. He does decent damage. His active actually can do a lot of damage. Because it deals bolter damage, which doesn't have great pierce, but it's to all enemies within 2 hexes, and then he scores an additional 1 hit against adjacent enemies. So basically, he has a two range bubble, 2 hex bubble, where he hits everything. Now, against characters with armor, or a lot of armor, that's not going to be a big deal, but it actually does a surprisingly good job of clearing out summons. So he is seeing use a little bit of use in the higher end tiers. I think part of that is because people are finally getting him unlocked and getting him built. And I think it's just enough to push him up into that bottom B tier. Alright, so moving on. Next we have Necrons. And I'm going to struggle with some of these Necron names. I'm just going to say that right now, guys. So first up, we have Makotep. Makotep is a solid B tier. He does get used in Arena. I think more it's because he pairs well with Aleph Null and other summons because of his active. He also does have a nice range 3 attack. Doesn't have a lot. It is Gauze. So it's, let's see, Gauze is sitting at 60 pierce rate, so it's actually kind of decent. He can put out a little bit of decent splash damage with that. A little damage here, a little damage there. But I think for the most part, he's being used in Arena because of his active, which basically just lets summons near him go again. Obviously, with the Scarabs, that gives them a chance to multiply when he does that. I think it also does the same thing for, what the heck are these things called? Grots. So he is being used in Arena. He's a better character, in my opinion, in Live Arena, but he's a solid B tier character. Also, his passive does give extra movement to stuff near him. Again, I think in regular Arena that doesn't matter all that much. I mean, occasionally it'll come up, but for the most part, just because you get to dictate positioning in Arena, it doesn't really matter that much. All right, coming next is Immospec. That's what I'm going to say. I don't know. C tier. Okay. He's squishy. He does decent damage. He does a lot of hits. And his hits are at, a nice 60 pierce rate. But, and he has Overwatch, which is pretty nice. But it is only a range 2 Overwatch, and he's squishy. He just dies. If he was a little tankier, he'd probably be higher. If he had range 3, which thematically wouldn't make sense just because he has a bunch of pistols. In fact, with his pistols being range 1, that actually doesn't really make sense because most stuff in the game that has pistols, range 2, most stuff in the game with pistols only has basically melee range. So they already kind of gave him a bump with that. But if he was range 3 with his Overwatch, that would be much, much better. But since it's only range 2 and he is super squishy, he just doesn't get built for Arena. And I am going to put him in C tier because, he still does a lot of damage. It's just he's going to do damage and then he's going to die. And, his cons pretty much outweigh his pros. All right, coming up next, we have our first gods of the Arena. And that's going to be Aleph Null. Aleph Null is one of the top 3 always characters being built in Arena, usually sitting in that 3rd place. It's out of the big 3, it's the one that gets built a little bit less than the other 2, or gets used a little bit less than the other 2. Actually, funny note, on my main account, I actually don't have Aleph Null built, which, a lot of people are going to be like, what? I'm completely fine with not building him. Eventually I will, or it's probably her because it's a spider that spawns other spiders. I am eventually going to invest in her, but my Arena team I'm happy with right now, and I just don't have her built. But in the top level she is being built, and there's no reason not to invest in her, guys. She is one of the pillars of Arena. There's 3 pillars of the Arena, and she is one of them. Coming up next, we have Thutmose. Thutmose, I am going to put him in D. And the reason I'm going to put him in D as the first D character is just, he's just not good. He's squishy, right? He kind of seems like he should do psychic damage, which he doesn't. He has a decent little ability where when he gets adjacent to stuff, he does direct damage, which is 100% pierce, which is kind of nice. And then he has Plasma, which is 65 pierce rate, which is pretty nice. But here's the thing. At range 2, his Plasma does 2 hits. At range 1, it only does 1 hit. And since his passive does damage when he ends his movement next to something, unless that passive damage kills what he moves next to, he's stuck only getting 1 hit with his Plasma. So his active and his regular stats kind of jar with each other. He is also really squishy. I'm sorry, I said active. I meant his passive. His passive and his regular stats, with his regular attacks, kind of jar. They don't meld with each other. His active is decent. It does direct damage to up to a target and up to 2 other random enemies within 2. It is direct damage, so that could be pretty nice. Maybe I have him a little underrated. Maybe he is more of a C tier character, but I just don't see him really built at all. The direct damage is nice, I guess, but he is squishy, and just because his passive kind of jars with the rest of his build and what he wants to do, I just don't see it with him. Coming in next, we have a new fit. I'm going to put him in B tier. And maybe that's a little high because I don't see him often at the higher end of Arena, but he is decent. Like, on paper at least, he looks really, really good. I don't know if it's whether just people don't have him built, or aren't investing in him, but if you look at his skills, right? So his active, basically, he summons 1 Necron warrior for each round that is started, and then he summons 1 more Necron warrior for each friendly unit with the trait Living Metal that has been defeated in battle. So it's not the best of summons, but it's decent. So if you use it turn 1, you're probably only going to get 1, but if you wait turn 2, you'll at least get 2, and if your Aleph Null has died, or Makotep, if you're using him and he has died, you could get more. It is actually a decent, like, catch-up mechanic in Arena, where if, like, they've wiped out a big chunk of your team, and you can spawn in those Necron warriors, it's decent. And then at the start of his turn, he does energy damage to random adjacent characters. Energy damage is only 30 pierce, so it's not great. Again, I probably have him ranked too high. He probably is more of like the high end of C, but I do occasionally see him built, so I am going to put him up at the B tier. All right, moving on. All right, so now we're going to go to guard. So we have Sybil Devine. I'm going to put her in D. Now, there was a lot of buzz about her because she is a psyker, so she does psychic damage, which is decent. But her active for me is just way too RNG. And her passive, which lets things around her ignore Overwatch, is nice. I mean, she gives them infiltrate, and they take a little bit less damage. It's decent. It's much better in live arena. Again, guys, a lot of times you get to dictate how you're going to enter, how you're going to get your alpha strike, just because you're going to move up outside of threat range, let the opponent come in. A lot of times you're going to have somebody that overwatches one of theirs away, and then, you're not usually taking Overwatch. Maybe you take it once or twice, but it's not enough to make infiltrate, in my opinion, really matter in regular arena. Again, guys, live arena, I think differently. I'm sure some people are going to have, different opinions on her, but I think she's down in D tier. Coming in next, Commissar Yarrick. Yeah, you know where he goes, guys. He is one of the gods of the arena, one of the 3 pillars of arena. Amazing unit. Either the best or the second best. A lot of times him and Archimedos end up being tied for use. I'll tell you, on my account, he's my highest built character. And in arena, when he summons those 4 guards, man, those 4 guards are so good. They just pretty much one-shot stuff, and they are tanky. They stay around, and it's just because of how high I have him built. But yeah, what else is there to say? He's one of the champions, gods of arena. All right, coming in next, Cut Skoden. He's going to be a D tier for me. He does physical damage. He is a multi-hitter, and unfortunately, multi-hit with physical damage kind of stinks, just because, yeah, you're going to be decent against Scarabs, but anything with armor, you're just going to struggle. He does have an okay passive where he does a little bit more damage on the turn he moves into melee damage or melee range with somebody, and then actually his active ability is actually pretty decent, but it's not enough to save him. He's also really, I don't know. He seems like he should be more tanky than he is just because he has that giant shield, and he's not. So I'm going to put him in D tier. Coming in next, we have Thaddeus Noble. Thaddeus Noble, in my opinion, is an A tier character. I think he is better than these characters I have in B tier, so he's going to be my first A tier. He's usually either right at the bottom of top 10 or squeezing in or just out of top 10. I think some of that is just because people haven't built on him. I think people are sleeping on him, honestly. And the reason I think that, well, first off, his passive's pretty nice. Friendly units within 2 hexes with the trait heavy weapons deal extra damage. So some of the characters, at least early on, you'll see Certus, and then you're going to see Vindicta, their heavy weapons characters. But the big one is Calendus, right? So as Calendus starts within 2 hexes of him, she does extra damage. And as far as I know, that counts on Overwatch as well. So he's got a really solid passive. And then his active is amazing. So basically his active does damage. Let's read it. If he hasn't moved, so you do have to sacrifice his movement to do it, he unleashes a barrage of 5 shells on any target on the battlefield, each dealing 2 hits. So each shell does 2 hits of blast damage. 3 randomly hit the target hex or surrounding hexes, and the remaining 2 hit the hexes surrounding those. For each round that has ended, 1 more of the shells hits the target hex, starting with the shells hitting the outer hexes. The suppressive fire trait applies also to this ability. That's worded a little weird. So basically, suppressive makes a character do less damage, gives them 1 less move, and means they can't overwatch. There is something to be said about first turn using this. Now, it's less accurate. The more turns that it goes on, the more accurate it gets. But there's something to be said first turn, just not moving with him and using this while your opponent's units are usually going to be bunched up. And when he isn't using his active, he does have a range 3 blast damage. It's not great. He's mainly in here for his passive and his active, but his active is just so good. I think it moves him up into A tier. He's perfect for getting that splash damage on a team. Like, it's not usually going to one-shot stuff, but it is going to get damage on everything, which usually moves stuff into one-shot range for the rest of your characters. And I do think the more he gets built, the more we are going to see him in high-level arena. Not to mention, he's amazing in live arena. But again, this is a regular arena, but I do think he is an A-tier character. All right, coming in next is Creed. Creed is one of these hard ones to really judge because I don't think a lot of people have him built, but on paper he looks really, really good. So again, he's kind of in this same category with a Newfit where, you know, I don't see him that often. I do occasionally see him though, and I don't know whether he's just looks better on paper than he actually is, or, you know, people just are sleeping on him a little bit. And, you know, he being one of the legendary characters, it could just be people haven't farmed him up. There are better legendaries to farm than him. So maybe we start to see more use of him after people have kind of farmed up the better legendaries. But I do think he at least deserves to be in B tier. And I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually starts moving up into A tier. Just because on paper he's so good. And what do I mean on that? Well, his active, he summons 2 guardsmen, okay, in free adjacent hexes. So not as good as Yarick, because Yarick gets 4. However, all friendly guardsmen within 2 hexes then immediately takes a turn. So with Yarick being so good and his guardsmen being so dominant, I think Creed really has a spot. It's almost like he almost has like a Mechotep type ability where he's going to go up, spawn in his 2 own guardsmen, and then stuff near other guardsmen within 2 hexes of him are all going to immediately get to take a turn. And letting Yarick's guardsmen immediately take another turn is really, really good. So that's why I think Creed is decent. And then also he kind of has a Celestine type ability where the first time he's targeted in battle, he spawns uh, Sergeant Kell, and anytime he is attacked, Kell switches hexes with him and takes that damage instead, as long as they're adjacent to each other. So he kind of has his own built-in bodyguard, and it is a summons too. And I don't know how good Kell is, but just having that built-in bodyguard, you see it with Celestine, I think makes him decent. So with his active and his passive, I do think he's B tier. I think we will see more use of him as we go up. All right, so that is going to be it for guard. So now we're going into Black Legion, and not going to shock anybody. The first character is going to be Angrax, and he's going to be a just don't. Maybe I'm being a slightly too harsh on him. He dies, right? You think Terminator armor, he'd be a little bit tankier. He's not. He just dies. He basically first turn. Now this doesn't matter all that much in arena, but his first turn is basically useless because he has to teleport in and he can't do any damage. And then he's only got movement 2, so he's slow. His active is okay, does decent damage, and his passive is actually kind of cool. There is a little strategy you can use with him in onslaught mode, but in arena, yeah, just don't build him for arena. All right, up next, it's going to be Volk. Volk is going to be B tier. He's another one of these characters that you do occasionally see used. He kind of does the same thing that Thaddeus does, in my opinion, where he kind of just is going to get some nice splash damage with his active on a bunch of stuff. It's not going to one-shot stuff, but it's going to bring stuff into killy range for everything else. And then he does have a chance of doing extra heavy round damage when he hits, so he's got a little bit of RNG where he can do some extra damage. He's a solid character, and I'd put him solidly in the B tier. Coming up next is the last of the gods of Arena, Archimedos. Archimedos, same thing with Yarick. They're kind of interchangeable. Which one's better? Psychic, Psyker, so he does psychic damage, which has 100% pierce. Really, really good. And then, obviously, he's a summoner, and his bloodletters are really, really, really good. So, if you pay attention to Arena at all, these are the 3 guys that pretty much everybody uses, and then their last 2 slots are kind of made up of these A and B tier type characters. So, yeah, I don't think I really need to explain any further. All right, coming in next is Harkin. Harkin is an interesting character to me. He does everything good, and early on, I probably would have put him in A tier. I think he's kind of fallen off a little bit as you get higher, and I probably put him at the high end of B tier. He probably is a high end B tier. Maybe I'm underrating him a little bit. He still does see a decent amount of use, but I think there's better characters than Harkin right now. And I'm just noticing something, guys, as I'm making this list. There is no Eldar characters or Eldari characters on here, so I apologize with that. Somebody needs to update Tier Maker and get those characters on there. But with that, we still will rank them. I'll just tell you where they need to go. That's my bad. Coming up next is Abaddon. People are going to boo me for putting Abaddon here. I think Abaddon is an A tier character. This is probably going to be a character that I get, hey, you have him severely overrated. Well, maybe I do, and maybe I'm being a little biased with Abaddon, just because I have him on my main. I've had him since the beginning, and I have invested in him and built him. And honestly, I'm never disappointed with what he does in Arena, and that's why I'm putting him in A tier, because he does what I need him to do. His active ability will one-shot almost everything in the game. Not 100%. There's sometimes, like if I'm going up against somebody that's a little bit more skilled than me and has their characters built a little bit higher than me, he doesn't one-shot, but he will pretty much at least bring them into, like, another hit automatically kills them. But for the most part, he auto-kills stuff. he does take damage when he uses his active, and a lot of times he dies after the turn he uses his active. But he's not there to be tanky. For me, the role he fills in my team is he kills one of these three, and for the most part, he will kill one of these three pretty much always with his active, and then he dies. But I consider that a really good trade. And since he does that consistently on my team, I think he is an A tier character. I do think people are sleeping on him. With that, he also does multi-hits on both his ranged and his melee attacks. He's better in melee because he has more hits and he does power damage, which has better pierce rate. So he is one of those characters in melee that can one-shot scarabs, so that is nice as well. And then his passive is actually really good for chaos. Basically, stuff that's around him, next to him, will deal extra damage if it's chaos. And then if those characters have the Let the Galaxy Burn trait, which as of right now is only the other Black Legion characters, they will also do an additional hit. They'll do an additional hit when the Let the Galaxy Burn trait is triggered. So he's got, his passive is really good. I mean, if we're looking at these characters, look, we've got B tier, Black Legion, and then we've got God of the Arena. So Black Legion, usually you're going to see it, you're going to see Archimedes, and a lot of times you're going to at least see Harkin, and occasionally you'll see Volk being used too. They're up there, so his passive matters. And, for me, again, probably have him ranked maybe a little too high. Some people will say he's B tier. Maybe some people even say C tier. People will say he's C tier, just don't have him, haven't used him, don't understand what he does. But in my opinion, in Arena for me, and I am, my main is on the higher end of the Arena teams. I'm not a whale, so I don't put a lot of money into the game. But at the tier level that I'm at, he does exactly what I ask him to do. And that's why I'm putting him at A tier. All right, up next, we have Death Guard. All right, so first up, we got Typhus. Typhus is going to be, in my opinion, a C tier character. He is a psyker, so he does have that going for him. He does have a decent little active that does an AoE psychic damage. Maybe I'm sleeping on him a little bit. Maybe he needs to be up at the lower end of B tier. But for me, I'm going to put him in C tier. And then his passive just does direct damage to one random opponent adjacent to him. He is Death Guard, so he does have that nice ability where usually he'll be left with one hit point. But I just don't, again, he's one of these characters occasionally I see used at higher end, but not enough for me to think he's worth more than maybe high-end C tier. Coming in next, Malladus, D tier. And I'm not going to really explain a lot of the D tier guys. He's slow. Yeah, he hits decent when he gets there, but he's just slow. Rotbone. Rotbone, probably for arenas, probably just don't. He's okay. He's better than Sirius here for healing, but again, Death Guard, he's slow. He's got a nice little thing where when stuff next to him dies, they immediately return, which is decent. But for me, I'm just gonna put him in the just don't. Pestillion. Probably another just don't character, guys. Passive seems really, really good, and he does do direct damage with his hit, which is interesting, but it is melee, and again, it comes on a Death Guard body, which is speed 2. Now, again, maybe speed 2 isn't as much of a hindrance in Arena, just because you do get to kind of control people coming in and that kind of thing, but I just don't see it with this guy. His passive looks better than it actually is. Or sorry, his active. His active looks better than it actually is, so I'm just going to go ahead and put him in just don't. Maybe he belongs in D tier, but for me, just don't. Corodius. Corodius is a D tier. He is a summoner, but he's another one of these that his summons really RNG, and it gets better in rounds 3 and 4, and then even better in 5 and 6. But in arena, at least, you're usually not getting to those rounds. Usually arena is pretty much over round 2, round 3 at the latest. So for me, he's another one that does buff movements for chaos around him. I think Corodius is maybe better, a little bit better in live arena and in some other parts of the game, but in regular arena, to me, he's just a D tier. So yeah, not great for Death Card in regular arena. All right, coming in next, we've got Sisters of Battle. Vindicta. Vindicta's a solid C tier, right? She's hard to use, but she does decent damage. Her damage does fall off the higher in arena you get, though, and that's why I have her in C tier. She is one of those characters that's going to be really good for you in early arena, though. And for me, she's going to be in C tier. All right, coming up next is Isabella. Isabella is going to be the only healer that I rank at D tier. Don't use her in arena, guys. She is kind of tempting because she has the nice thing where as soon as stuff gets hit next to her, she auto heals them, and then she does have a revive, which is pretty nice. And that's why I think she's maybe D tier, maybe a little bit more playable in arena than the other characters. But again, overall, you want stuff in arena that's going to kill stuff. You don't want to play defensively, and she just, she doesn't do that. She's a defensive character. All right, moving on. Morvenval. Morvenval is A tier, one of the 2 best legendaries in the game. Consistently used in legendary. Honestly, she to me does the same type of thing, fills the same type of role as Thaddeus does. Maybe a little bit better than Thaddeus just because it's more accurate. She also kind of does the same thing Volk does. I think Volk is kind of like the poor man's Morvenval. But yeah, she's just solid. Another one of these characters that's going to put out really good splash damage to a bunch of characters, which pretty much brings most of those characters into one-shot range for the rest of your team. Then we have Roswitha. Roswitha is another solid A-tier character. With some of the better units in the game being Psychers and Demons. Right, so if we look up here, Gods of the Arena, Psychic, right? Psyker. We look in B tier, you've got Varos, okay? And then you've got Volk, who's a demon. She just does a lot of extra damage against those characters. And then also Archimedes spawns in Bloodletters, which are demons. Maybe I'm overrating her a little bit. She's amazing in other parts of this game, and Guild Raid especially. Maybe she deserves to be in B tier, high-end B, but I'm going to go ahead and put her in A tier. She does a lot of damage against the best character, one of the best characters in the game. And she can quite often one-shot, so if your opponent doesn't get his summons off, she a lot of times will one-shot the opponent's Archimedes. So just because of that, I think she ends up in A tier. All right, Celestine. Top of A tier. Maybe one of the characters that's going to slowly move as more people get her built to a high level. I think she might be one of the characters that kind of moves up. She might end up in the Gods of the Arena section, in a couple months. But right now, because a lot of people don't have her built, and the ones that do don't have her all the way maxed, I'm going to put her in A tier. She does solid damage, and you cannot one-shot her. And she's super mobile. She kind of does everything. She kind of does what Harkin wants to do, except she's tankier. And the reason she's tankier is because of her passive where she spawns in angels that take damage for her. So she cannot be one-shot. And then she's very mobile and she does really good damage. So high A tier for her. All right, coming in next is going to be Black Templar. And I'll be honest, guys, Black Templar, pretty much nobody uses any of them, so it's going to be hard for me to rate them. So if you feel I'm wrong, just let me know why. First off, we have Sword Brother, Godswill. Yeah, I think I'm saying that right. I'm going to put him in D tier. Just has a melee attack. It's a one-hit. His passive is cool where it gets to push stuff, or his active gets to push stuff. But I just don't see him doing enough damage. He does do extra damage on a crit, and then if he crits, he also reduces the opponent's armor. But I just don't. He doesn't bring enough to the table. Brother Bashard, that's how I'm gonna say that. Is it just don't? Unfortunately, man, he kind of has the same problem that Bellator has, except Bellator's way more mobile. If Bellator was only movement 2, like Brother Bashard is, then Bellator would also be a just don't. He's super tanky, and that's pretty much what he does. His active can put out some damage, but it's going to be a one-time use. Man, when I first saw him, I was like, oh, he's going to be so good. But that's when you could only see his passive and his active. I thought he was going to be really good, but then when you get him unlocked, you just realize he does multi-hits, multi-bolter hits, and he's a little bit better with 4 hits with power damage when he gets into melee, but he's speed 2. It's just too slow for what he is and what he wants to do. He'll survive. He'll stay on the board for a while, but that's not going to help you win arena matches. Then we have Ancient Thorid. He's got a nice little active where he helps people block more, but again, that's really the defensive play style, and I just don't think that works in arena that well. So D tier for him as well. Brother Jaeger, that's how, or Jagar, probably butchering that. He's going to be the first one I put in C tier. And yes, I have been saying defensive doesn't work very, very well, but his passive is actually really good. Whenever he gets attacked, he does 2 hits of power damage before the enemy attack executes. You know how Calendus is really annoying because when you get to her and hit her, she hits back, and that's really annoying. But she only gets to do that once. He does it every time he's hitting melee. Now, he doesn't have the type of crit bonus that Calendus has. So, it's not as strong, but the fact that it's every time he gets hit in melee is actually kind of decent. And while it is more of a defensive strategy, I think it's better than like, oh, I'm just really tanky. I'm going to do damage to you. And again, he does it before he takes the hit, which is really nice. I made the mistake one time of summoning Archimedos, the bloodletters on him, and the bloodletters just all died, right? They summoned, they went to hit, he killed them first. The next one summoned, same thing, because he continually does it. And it's actually kind of decent. So I'm going to put him in C tier. He might be a character to watch that moves up too. Also, his active ability is actually pretty cool. It's a taunt, which nothing else in the game right now has. So basically, he performs his attack, and he immediately, performs an attack against something, and then that thing, he does extra damage, and that thing does, whatever he taunts does less damage to him, and is taunted, which means taunted units are forced to attack the taunting unit. They can't move away, use their active abilities, heal, repair, or attack any other target. Healing removes the effect. So you can cleanse it with a heal, but other than that, that character has to hit him. Really, really good. So I'm going to put him in C tier, and I could see as people start to build him, maybe he moves up a little bit. Alright, coming in last for Black Templar is going to be High Marshal Hellbreed. B tier, but I actually think he's probably A tier. So I know that kind of sounds weird that I'm putting him in B tier with that, but it's just because nobody has him built. And the reason I say he's probably A tier is because he is a Psyker killer. He kind of falls in the same lines of Roswitha, where he just annihilates Psykers. So his active is all friendly units within 2 hexes now deal extra damage and gain extra pierce in melee, regardless of the damage type, so pretty good. And then his passive is he gains an extra movement when there's an enemy Psyker on the battlefield, and this unit and friendly adjacent units deal extra damage to Psykers in melee. I think he's definitely B tier, and I think as people get him built, as long as Archimedos is up there, I think that there might be a case that he maybe belongs at A tier. Also, guys, I don't have him built. I do occasionally see him in high-end arena. It's not often, but occasionally I do. I think this is a character that probably does pretty good in Guild Raid too. I think he's one of those ones that kind of just falls into the place where you can only farm one legendary at a time, and that's going to take, gosh, if you, there's really no way to speed it up. So, if you're just farming and not getting pulling a lot, Celestine's going to take almost a half a year to pull. So I think people are just focusing on her. And, I think maybe as this game gets older, we'll start to see him more. And I do think he might actually move up. But I'm going to put him into B tier for now. All right, so that brings us into the Eldari. I unfortunately don't have, their pictures here to put them up here, so we'll just talk about where I'm going to put them. So if you're one of those guys that has skipped to this end of this video and you're looking at the overall end and you're like, why aren't they here? Well, you should have been watching the video. So first up, we've got Calendus. Calendus is A tier. Okay? We talked about how he basically took over Certus. Gets really high crit rate. Calendus often in arena, very often, will one-shot something that comes in. And then if you're lucky, something else moves into melee with her, and sometimes she can one-shot there. And then on her turn, she turns around and one-shot something else. There has been plenty of times where I take out 3 characters before I even get to take my second turn, or at the start of my second turn, because Calendus killed 2, 1 from Overwatch, 1 from something moving into melee to her, and then trying to hit her, and then she turns around and kills something else. Now, obviously, that all revolves around her crit stat, which can go up to, I believe, 62 is the max that you can get it. However, if you play with the next character, which is Athena, that crit rate can go up to, I believe it can go up to like 82%, which makes that a lot more likely. Now, Athena is one of those characters, I think she's being slept on. In my opinion, she's high B tier and maybe A tier. And it's basically because she fills this same Harkin role. So I think that's part of the reason maybe Harkin's fallen off a little bit, in that she's really mobile, extremely mobile, right? Speed 5 even, so more mobile than Harkin. She does pierce damage and multi-hits with 3. So she's actually decent against Scarabs. She won't one-shot Scarabs, but she can get good hits on Scarabs. And it's pierce. So what is piercing? 80% pierce rate. So she's really good against armor. She actually hits really good. She's not going to one-shot something, but she does decent damage. Her active's not great right now. I don't think it works the way it's supposed to be working. It's just not good. But her passive is amazing. Friendly units within 2 hexes deal extra damage, and their crit chance, if they have one, is increased. Now, from what I understand, mine's currently sitting at 19%. What I understand, at max, it ends up being 20%. So, they deal extra damage while within 2 hexes, and she buffs their crit rate by 20%. Just think of this, guys. Most of your attacking characters, you're going to have the crit rate type build on them. They're going to be like 35 to 37% crit rate. If she's maxed, or her skills or her passives at legendary, that's adding an extra 20%. That takes you from basically 1/3 critting 1/3 of the time to critting half the time, because their crit rates are going to move up to like 55 to 57%. So even almost if they're sitting at 37%, it almost moves her up to 2/3 of the time. And that's those characters. Now, Calendus, on the other hand, you're going to bump Calendus all the way up to, when both of them are maxed, 82% of the time you're going to crit with Calendus. And oh yeah, not only do they get extra damage and a better chance to crit, if they're Eldari, they get an additional bonus to damage. So Calendus is going to hit extra hard. So if you like Calendus, I personally love Calendus. Athena probably deserves a spot in your list too. I'm going to put her in B tier for now, but I do think she's probably a borderline A tier character. And then last but not least is Eldron. Eldron. I'm just gonna put him in incomplete. We don't know, right? On paper, looks pretty good. But you know, the event, we're on day 2 of the event right now, so I'm sure a couple whales have him unlocked already. But you know, we don't know enough. On paper, he looks decent. I don't know if he's gonna be decent for arena. He looks decent in other parts of the game, so we're gonna give him incomplete. So guys, with that being said, that's going to end my tier list video. If you watch this whole video, I really, really appreciate it. This has been an extremely long video. But, you know, I thought it was important to get one of these really in-depth arena tier lists out. And like I said, you know, the characters in the C to D tier, they're probably interchangeable. Some of them I probably overrated a little bit. Some of them I underrated a little bit. But at the high end of arena, guys, you see these 3 characters and then combinations of the A and B tier characters. And, you know, again, maybe you say Abaddon, I overrated. Maybe you say, you know, some of the other legendaries I slightly overrated. Maybe you say Boss Goldgorts and Harkin deserve to be an A. You know, that's up to you. This is just my personal opinion. But with that, as always, guys, thank you for watching my videos. If you do like my content and watch my content, please subscribe to my channel. We are sitting at, I think, 236 subscribers now at the time I'm making this video. We're getting really close, only 14 subscribers away from doing my next giveaway, which will be at 250 subscribers. So if you want to be part of that giveaway and you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe, help me get to that 250, and then be part of the giveaway when I do it. But with that, guys, as always, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day.